Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni muli wanji, namaste, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We're coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted and so very happy that you are joining us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about your show. Please tell their teachers, their librarians, their principal, and also please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher Radio, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is Emma Pearl. She'll be here to celebrate Mending the Moon. Before we invite Emma into the studio, we want to invite you to connect with us on social media. Facebook.com/readingwithyourkids, at Reading With Your Kids on Instagram, at Jedley Magic on Twitter. Of course, we'd love for you to visit our website, readingwithyourkids.com. You can sign up for our free newsletter. You can also use the contact button at the top of the page to tell us what you love about the show. Tell us what you don't like so much about the show. And you can also tell us who you'd like to hear in a future episode of the podcast. We really love getting guest suggestions from our audience. And also, please be sure to visit readingwithyourkids.com so you'll be the first to know when Drawing with Your Kids launches. I'll give you a secret. It's launching on January 1st. You don't want to miss it. It's going to be fantastic. Joining us right now from the beautiful nation of New Zealand. Our guest is here today to celebrate her beautiful picture book. It's called Mending the Moon. Please welcome to the show, Emma Pearl. Hi, Emma. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Jed. Thank you for having me.
I'm delighted to have you on. I can't wait for you to tell us all about Mending the Moon. What's this book about, please?
Okay, so it's the story of a little girl called Luna and her grandfather, Poppa. And one night she sees the moon falling out of the sky, and she rushes out to try and fix it, because it smashes into pieces on the mountaintop. And her grandfather team together with all the mountain animals to put the pieces of the moon back together and then get it back up into the sky.
Wow. That would be terrifying for me if I was out and looking at the moon and suddenly crashed to the ground.
Yeah, it makes a loud noise, and obviously it shatters into pieces, but it's also kind of rather tragically beautiful, because all the shards of moon are glowing and filled with moonlight, and all the animals come out of the shadows to see what's happening. And although it's quite a dramatic event, it's quite a sort of hushed and quiet and magical nighttime scene.
I bet. You know, one of the things that jumps out at me and something that I love is the relationship. This is a story about a little girl and her grandfather. I love that. I think that's something I don't know about New Zealand, but I think it's something here because where, you know, families are spread out and everybody is busy. I don't think a lot of kids have a chance to have that really close, wonderful relationship with their grandparents that I had with my grandparents.
Yeah, that was certainly an important aspect of the story when I was writing it. And to be honest, the grandfather figure is a little bit based on my own father, who was quite old when I was a child. So there's a bit of my father in him, definitely. But the relationship between the two characters is lovely, because he's always there supporting her and guiding her and protecting her, but he never takes over. It's Luna, the child, who's the instigator, and he allows her the space to find her solutions and solve the problem, but he's always there helping.
Do you think that wisdom that the grandfather in this book has to allow Luna to live her life and to make mistakes and to make discoveries, do you think that wisdom comes with age, or is it something that we're born with?
I think it possibly comes a little bit with age. I think it's quite a more of a grandparent trait than a parent trait, possibly, because they're a little bit more distant, a little bit able to stand back. I think when you've got very young kids, then the parents, they've done it all before, so they have a bit more, possibly they have a bit more faith in children's ability to cope with things and to find solutions to problems.
Yeah.
But I think it's also very much an individual character thing. That I think, some people naturally have that sort of supportive, guiding aura around them, rather than taking over bossy aura.
Yeah. Well, I'm mentioning it because now, as I'm getting up there in age, I look back over my life and who I was as a younger person and who I was when my kids were very young. And it's a lot easier for me to kind of sit back and say, okay, this is your life. We may not agree on things, but that's okay. You live your life, and I'm going to support you and hope it all works out.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it's hard sometimes to give people that freedom, give the children that freedom to make their mistakes. But that's the best way to learn, really.
Hopefully the moon will never experience the moon crashing into the earth, because I think it will do a little bit more damage than just make big noise. But you were mentioning that it's tragic and scary, but also beautiful. That's one of the things that is true about nature. There's a lot of things that are really kind of catastrophic at the moment, but when things kind of settle down, they're really beautiful. I'm thinking of, the Grand Canyon and how, rushing water carved all that out. And my beautiful wife and I visited a volcano a couple years back down in Costa Rica, which was a little bit scary because it was still active and kind of smoky, but also beautiful and magnificent in its own way.
Absolutely, yeah. New Zealand has lots of volcanoes too. But yeah, I think part of the story was about trying to show that nature is so powerful and so beyond our control, really. But we really need to step up and take care of it as well. And yeah, as you say, it's the world is in a bit of a mess at the moment. So I think it's important to try and elicit that kind of compassion and awareness of what's going on in the world with kids at a very young age, because they're the ones that are going to have to solve the problems that we've created, sadly.
Was there one thing in particular that inspired this book?
Not really one thing. I've always been fascinated by the moon, so I've written about it all my life, probably. But it was just a brainstorming session, story ideas, and trying to think of strange questions to answer. And one of them was just, what if the moon fell out of the sky? So that's where it started.
And that's interesting. So do you start, is that one of your writing tools, that you just kind of propose some questions, and in trying to think of the answer, your stories kind of spring up from those conversations you have with yourself?
It has been. I've used that sort of method in the past, yes. I wrote this story back in 2017, I think, so it was a long time ago, and it was when I was just starting to learn how to write properly. So I didn't. Now I have I couldn't tell you how many ideas for books and stories that I have. It runs into the hundreds, literally. So I don't need to be actively brainstorming anymore, because I've got reams and reams of things to work on. But yeah, when I started, that was a method. There are lots of others. I probably won't be able to think of them now, but there are, if you switch your mind onto that way of thinking, there are stories to be found everywhere, in every conversation you have, every book you read, every movie you watch, every piece of news you see on the TV. You can, once you've got your mind focused on storytelling, you can find inspiration everywhere.
Yeah, I like that. I wanted to ask you that we've had other authors in the past, tell us that a lot of their writing begins by asking what if, and you certainly this began for you, asking the question, what if the moon fell from the sky? I think that would be a great way to start conversations with our kids. Not only having a conversation about mending the moon, but just on a regular basis. Hey, what if we did this? What if the world was like that? What if your friends did that? I think that could be a really fun way to talk about some things with our kids.
Yeah, absolutely. And you don't have to limit yourself to sort of sensible, logical, rational questions. You can ask crazy things, and they can take you in all sorts of directions that you would never imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned that you have hundreds of ideas right now. How do you? I was just speaking to an illustrator earlier today, and he was telling us how he has sketchbooks and he keeps illustrations, things that he sees that he just kind of spark his imagination. He'll sketch something out or write down a funny title for a book, and he'll go back to those sketchbooks. What about for you? How do you kind of hold on and keep track of those ideas that you have?
I write them down because my memory is horrible. So if I don't write them down, I forget them. Mm-hmm. Sometimes in a notebook, I have too many notebooks, but I then try and transfer them to digital files. So I write picture books, and I write for middle grade and young adult. Mm-hmm. And I haven't started to write for adults yet, but I have a whole load of ideas for adult books as well. So I've got a file for each age group where I keep my ideas.
Do you find that you have to kind of switch and use different parts of your brain when you're writing for those different audiences?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, writing picture books is a completely different skill set to novel writing. So, yes, I tend to, like, last year I focused on novel writing. The year before I focused on picture book writing. Not necessarily intentionally, but that's just the way it happened. Mm-hmm. So it's quite difficult to move between the two, but it's also quite a nice relief mm-hmm. if you're getting overwhelmed with one thing to switch into another. Yeah. So
I bet it is. Did you always dream of becoming an author?
Yes. I was writing stories before I started school. Pretty much as soon as I could hold a pencil, I would write and draw, illustrate. I mean, I can't draw to save my life, but I didn't know that when I was 3 years old. So I loved writing and illustrating my stories. And yeah, I've written all my life, really. Yeah. I wrote a lot of poetry when I was a teenager. I wrote a novel in my 20s, but that was not very good. And then I didn't have much time to focus on writing with career and children and traveling the world and all sorts of other things like that. But when my kids started school is when I buckled down to really learn the craft. Because although I'd written all my life, there was a lot I didn't know about the craft of writing.
Yeah. That's, I think, one of the things that has been a fun discovery for me here doing the podcast for the past 5 years is understanding that writing is, in fact, a craft, and it certainly is something that a lot of people enjoy doing, and they think, oh, I've been a writer all my life, but you haven't taken that step to learn the craft. And the other thing that we love to remind authors, because we have a lot of authors who listen to the show, is that in addition to writing being a craft, once you publish your book, whether it's through a traditional publisher or self-publishing, it becomes a business for you. Your book is your small business.
Yeah, and it's quite a steep learning curve. The marketing side of things, I'm not really prepared for being my own PR person. I'm not particularly good at that side of things, but you have to learn it.
Yeah.
And big learning curve, as I said.
Now, I understand writing is kind of in your family and in your family blood. Is that right? Yes, my great uncle was Roald Dahl. So yes, absolutely. Yeah.
He was. When I was a kid, we lived just a few miles away from him. So he was a big part of our life. It was our extended family was quite close in those days. So I saw him most weeks probably. And yeah, he was obviously huge footsteps to follow in.
Mm-hmm.
As far as writing goes, but he was a very inspirational figure in my childhood.
Yeah, and what was he like? I know so many of us are familiar with his books and his writing, but we didn't know him.
He was larger than life in every way, really. He was a very tall man, and just filled with energy. He always had a sort of intellectually inquisitive. He always wanted to quiz you about what you were doing, what was happening at school, what was going on in the world. And it was a little bit scary in some ways, because he always wanted to hear what you had to say, and I was quite a shy child, so it was. But he was, at the same time, he was someone that you always really wanted to impress.
Mm-hmm.
And he was very, very kind and generous, and just good fun.
Yeah. And now, do you think that when he was asking those questions and wanting to listen to you, that obviously he's a loving uncle, and he, wanted to give you his attention, and he wanted to know what was going on in your life. Do you think he was also doing a little bit of research for some of his writing?
Yes, I do actually. Yeah, and now that I'm writing myself, I can appreciate that more, and I can see. Yeah, he was actually really interested in what children were thinking, what
Mm-hmm.
What things excited them or scared them, or so. Yeah, I definitely think he was probably doing a bit of research as well.
Yeah. Do you think that there was any lessons about writing or researching that you kind of learned from observing him and being with him?
I don't know specifically, because I don't think I ever sort of sat down and had a conversation with him about how to be a writer, or although I did do an interview when I was 10 years old. I interviewed him. He said, let's do a pretend interview. You can take it into school and play it to your friends, and we'll pretend like you're a journalist or something. So I've got the recording of that, which is lovely. But it wasn't really writing craft advice. It was, I think I asked him at one point whether he did writing because he liked children, or whether he did it for money. So anyway, it's a lovely interview.
Awesome. Well,
Yeah.
You had me on the edge of the seat. Are you going to tell us what his answer was?
Oh, he said that he did it for both. He loved children, that's why he wrote for them. But it was also a job for him, and he went to work in his little writing hut every day, just as other people would go to the office to earn their money.
Yeah. Hey, do you ever feel intimidated? Like, wow, I got some big shoes to fill here. I don't know if I want to be a writer. Maybe I should do something else.
Yeah. I mean, that's why it took me so long to get around to doing it, probably. There was definitely a bit of, yeah. I mean, I don't ever compare myself to him as a writer. I'm not, in the same league. I'm a beginner, rookie, and he's like legend of children's literature from last century. So, but yeah, it took me, I'm 50 next year, so it's taken me that long to build up the courage to go for it.
Well, we're really happy that you did. Mending the Moon. I'm imagining I'm sitting on the couch with my daughter. I think this is a book that my daughter would have loved when she was 4, 5, 6 years old, and she loved reading with me, and we loved talking about the books. What kind of things do you think my daughter and I could have talked about?
Well, I think as well as being a story about the moon falling out of the sky, it's also a story about respecting nature, as I mentioned before. It's about teamwork and persistence and perseverance, because obviously they try to mend the moon and it doesn't work a few times before they succeed. So it's about appreciating the miracles of nature, and caring for the natural world. It's also a story about how the moon got its markings, which is quite nice. And it's got the grandparent-child relationship, which is a nice focus point. And there's also a thing towards the end of the story where it's about how imperfections can be seen as a memory of an important emotional event and not as a flaw.
Wow.
So I quite like that theme as well.
Yeah.
And then there's the sort of STEM sciencey side of things related to the moon. So you can talk about how the moon affects the Earth and gravity and tides. What is the moon made of? How it orbits the Earth and the changing phases of the moon. You could even talk about the moon landing in the 1960s, stuff like that. And there's also a good wealth of moon legends, poems, and stories in literature that you can link to it.
Yeah. You mentioned again that the grandfather-granddaughter relationship. Unfortunately, my daughter wasn't able to meet my dad because he passed away before she was born. But she could tell you all about him because we had many conversations, not only about my father, her grandfather, but also about my grandmother. And I think that that's really important, too, for us to remember as parents that, there are a lot of people in our lives that were important to us that aren't around anymore, but we can still share those memories and those stories about those people with our kids. And I think it's gives them a powerful connection with the people who came before them, and also kind of comforts them to let them know that there are a lot of people going to remember you for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that's close to my heart as well, because my dad passed away before my kids were born, so I completely relate to what you're saying. Also, I only ever knew one grandparent myself. But yeah, that connection to your own history, I think, is really important. Yeah.
Well, it's really important that we let people know where they can go to find out more about you and find out more about Mending the Moon.
Okay, so my website is emmapellauthor.com. There's all sorts of information on there, including the interview with Roald Dahl, which you can listen to. And it's also got the purchase links for buying the book on there. You can get it from all the usual places, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and bookshop.org. And there is a sequel coming out next year.
Wonderful.
Saving the Sun.
Excellent. Well, we'll have to have you back to talk about that.
That would be lovely.
Yeah. We've had a great time speaking to the author of Mending the Moon, Emma Pearl. Emma, thanks so much for being with us.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for having me.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Brian Sullivan. He'll be here to celebrate his debut picture book. It's a certified great read, and it's called Lila Loves Life. Brian's a fascinating guy. You don't want to miss this episode. Coming up next on the podcast. Want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. First, we want to thank our guest, Emma Pearl. Please be sure to check out Mending the Moon. Also want to thank my team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Mirabella Q, Jordan Saley, Stephanie Davila, Skylar Strauss. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. You're the person we're doing this for. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.